What's happening? Happy Monday to all of you. Thanks for joining me. As always, it is very much appreciated. Let's start here. We have spent time on Drake Maye, as you all know. We've spent time on him before the draft. We spent time on him during the draft, and we have spent time on him since the draft. And we have really paid attention to when Maye will be ready. When will Drake Maye start? We even talked about it last week when the schedule came out. But we haven't really looked at Jerod Mayo and his role in making that decision, because it should come down to Mayo on when it is the right time to pull the trigger for the future of this franchise to be your QB1. And today, I want to take a deep look at Jerod Mayo and this decision he has to make eventually, I think, during the 2024 football season. Mike Reese wrote about this a little bit over the weekend at ESPN.com. Here's what he wrote. Mayo's decision of when to insert Maye into the lineup will be among the most important of his young coaching career. The hope that Maye provides the Patriots has similarities to 1993, when quarterback Drew Bledsoe, who, like Maye, was among the youngest prospects at the position that year, was selected number 1 overall in the NFL draft. Then Coach Bill Parcells notably said at the time, "I promise you I will not throw him to the Wolves." Bledsoe, of course, was thrown to the Wolves. The team went 5-11, but in winning the final 4 games showed an arc of improvement to indicate better days were ahead for the franchise. The Patriots went 10-6 the following year and played in the Super Bowl in the 1996 season. So Jerod Mayo has this decision to make, and it could not be more of a critical decision than it is. If he gets this wrong, it could be a major, major, major issue for this franchise, not just for the next couple of years, but for a number of years down the road. And let's start here. Mayo has zero experience at any level with this kind of decision in the game of football. He's never been a head coach before. He's never been a head coach in college. He's never had to make this kind of decision in college or in the NFL. He's never had the responsibility to understand when is the right time to pull the trigger in the moment regarding a decision as big as this one. He might have made some calls in, the world of reality and the job that he was working on and, being in big business and all that stuff. He might have been able to make some decisions there, but he's never made a decision like he's going to make with Drake Maye. He has zero experience in making a call like this. And this is one of the risks that you take when you hire somebody who has the experience level or lack thereof that Mayo has. You are inherently taking a big risk when you hire somebody who's never been a defensive coordinator, who's never been an assistant head coach, who's never been a head coach, who did not coach in college, came out of the business world right back into football. This inherently is one of the biggest risks that you take. You are handing the responsibility of this franchise, of this organization. You're handing the keys to Jerod Mayo to make sure that he takes care of things responsibly and timely. And so this decision, this one decision regarding Drake Maye and when he will start a football game falling onto the lap of Jerod Mayo should be a question for all of us. How will Mayo handle this? Will he do his job, so to speak? Will he be impressionable? Will he allow himself to be influenced by others? Will Mayo be influenced by the fans? He says he won't be. I'm sure he believes he won't be. But when he gets into that position, and we're talking week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the fans at the games are howling, if it happens, are howling for Drake Maye to be thrown in there. Is Mayo going to have the fortitude to stand by what he thinks is right and turn down the voices of the fans and not worry about doing the interview with WEEI every week and subjugating his ego and allowing himself to show the humility, but also the logic behind not necessarily pulling the trigger when everybody else wants that trigger to be pulled by the head coach? Is he going to show that? Is he going to have that fortitude when speaking with the media every week to stand up there and say, Drake Maye is not ready just yet. We will play him when he's ready. Will he allow the owners to influence him in any way? Will Jonathan Kraft and Robert Kraft get a little bit antsy if this team is off to a slow start? And Maye is standing there. Everybody saw the picture he took with Tom Brady over the weekend, right? It's all over Twitter. People are excited. Look at Brady. Look at Drake Maye. Maye and Brady. Brady and Maye. This is a wonderful thing. What happens if you get off to a slow start in the first month and the owners start getting antsy? They start looking down at that field and say, Jacoby Brissett, yeah, he's good. He's fine. He's a nice veteran. We can trust him. He takes responsibility and accountability. Great teammate, all that stuff. But we need Maye out there on the field. We need that spice added. Will Jerod Mayo have the fortitude to say, I appreciate your opinion on this, ownership, but he's not ready? I appreciate the fans having the desire to see the number 3 pick get out there on the field and play and lead this team, but he's not ready. How impressionable will Mayo be? Will he be impressionable? Again, because he has zero experience at doing what he's going to be called upon to do, which is ultimately make this gigantic decision in the moment that will stand for the next 5, 8, 10 years. Will he have that fortitude? We've heard, and I'll talk about this a little bit later with Jacoby Brissett and what he had to say about Mayo last week. We've heard about Mayo being a player's coach, and that's fine. But will Mayo be susceptible to listening to the room versus what he feels is best for Drake Maye? And what I mean by that, if you're Mayo and you're sitting there in the moment and your team isn't off to a great start and some of the locker room starts to chirp, some of the locker room starts to whisper about Drake Maye, and the feeling is, hey, maybe, man, we have a better chance to win with Maye than we have with Brissett. What if Mayo disagrees with the players? Is Mayo going to stand up in front of that room and continue to roll out Brissett and say, Maye's not ready? Or will the quote-unquote players coach be susceptible to become part of that talk in the locker room, hear it so much from some of the players that he acquiesces, that he ends up saying, you know what? The guys are right. The guys want Maye. I got to put Maye out there. I've got to put Maye out there. That's what the team wants. That's what we're going to do. Or is he going to stand there? If he has to stand there alone as the head coach, is he going to stand there and tell the players, no, this is my call. I'm drawing the line, and I don't think Drake Maye's ready yet? Have a number of thoughts about this to continue on this topic in a minute. Don't forget, though, take a second of your time. Give us that thumbs up. Like the YouTube channel. Like the content that we deliver to you. If you love the content, you support us. You help us by giving us that like. You also help us and support us by subscribing to the channel. We're almost halfway to our goal, so to speak. We want 3,500 subscribers. We're inching towards 3,250. So let's continue to take that march. Let's continue to support the program. Like, subscribe, rate, and review on Spotify and Apple Pods. I will get back to my thoughts on Jerod Mayo and his just absolutely monumental role in making the Drake Maye decision at some point, I think, this season. But before we do that, super chat from Devin Allen. Thank you, Devin, for the super chat. $5 super chat. Jump to the front of the line with your comment, your question. I'm not putting Maye behind a trash offensive line. That's the quickest way to ruin him. Have a happy Monday, Nick. Go Celtics. Yeah, tomorrow, by the way, aside from Patriots talk, I am going to give you a little bit of a preview for Celtics and Pacers. That'll happen on tomorrow's podcast since the Pacers beat the Knicks yesterday in Game 7. They shellacked New York yesterday at MSG. The offensive line, if there's any concern that the offensive line is going to get their tookuses handed to them on a weekly basis, then you absolutely slow roll Drake Maye. And I know Evan Lazard does a great job with Patriots.com. I've heard Evan talk about this. You know, Evan's point of view is Maye can handle a bad offensive line better than Mac Jones because of his athletic ability, the things that he can do off platform, the things we've talked about as well. And I understand that idea. I do. I understand the idea that, hey, look, Maye can survive better than some of these other quarterbacks that we've seen, like Zappy and Mac. However, if this offensive line is a big issue, I'm still not putting the rookie quarterback back there until I feel like it's been somewhat solidified. The last thing you want is to speed up the clock on Drake Maye. He has to build up fundamentally his mechanics, and he's got to be super confident So what I don't want is Maye out there in front of a leaky offensive line. Now, I'm not talking about the offensive line has to be great. You just can't have a situation like you had in the first 4 to 6 weeks last year, which was a travesty for all of us to watch that football team. That offensive line was embarrassing. I don't even think I would call it an NFL offensive line. That O-line was giving up 40+% pressure, which is just out of control. Out of control. If the offensive line is that bad, if the offensive line is bringing you that much concern on a nightly basis when you try to sleep if you're Mayo, then you don't put Maye out there, because Maye, he has to trust his fundamentals. He's going to build his fundamentals. And the number one thing that could really, truly throw him off early in this season, away from the things that he has learned and the things that he has improved upon, the one thing that could really get in the way of that maturation process on the field when it comes to that foundation of mechanics is an offensive line that is leaky, that is causing Maye to run all over the place. It's not that I don't think Maye can survive the pressure. It's not that I don't think that he can run away from it and make a play with his legs. He certainly can. He did it a lot at North Carolina. What I'm worried about is that because Drake Maye is constantly moving around in the pocket and trying to escape pressure, the fundamentals of those mechanics, of the footwork, those start to deteriorate because he's always running around losing his mind. That's what I'm concerned with. It throws him off of his rhythm. It doesn't allow him to settle in that pocket. It doesn't allow him to find that rhythm. And so when you're working on somebody's footwork and you're really building him up from zero, the least amount of chaos around him, the better. Now, would I hold him back if the offensive line isn't great? Of course not. I'd play him. But it can't be a 5-alarm fire drill. If it is a 5-alarm fire drill, you don't put Drake Maye out there. You got to do the responsible thing. So I think that is absolutely part of the conversation, Devin, and I thank you for your super chat. All right, let's get back to Jerod Mayo's decision. He's going to be responsible for making the call on Drake Maye. First-time head coach. He's going to be the guy. And what happens if you have a tough first 5 games? We talked about the schedule last week, right? By some projections, when you look at wins and loss projections and all of that, the first 5 weeks of the season, the Patriots have one of the top 3 toughest schedules in the league. Very tough schedule through the first 5 weeks. With that in mind, what happens if you get off to a slow start? What happens if you have a very rough first 5 games? Will Mayo get impatient? You know, it's one thing to say in May that you're going to be patient with Maye. It's one thing to say it during rookie minicamp and during OTAs today, that you're going to make sure that Maye is completely ready before you put him out there. But what happens if you start 1-4? What happens if you start 0-5? We know head coaches, whether it's Mayo, Belichick, any head coach, Joe Mazzulla in any sport, any manager, their number one priority is wins and losses, especially when you're in the NFL. You've only got 17 games to prove yourself. And we know that Mayo is going to want to prove himself as a suitable replacement for the greatest of all time. What happens if you start 1-4 or 0-5? Does Mayo, as a head coach, will naturally feel, will he start to get impatient? Will he get impatient with the plan? Will he get impatient with the process? Will he say to himself, I know that we wanted to wait as long as humanly possible to throw Drake Maye out there, but man, oh man, we're 1-4, we're 0-5. Maye will play better than Jacoby Brissett's been playing. It's time to bring the rookie into the mix. It's time to throw him out there and start him this week. Will Mayo suffer that impatience that a lot of coaches would if they get off to a slow start, if they have that rough start in the first 5 weeks? Will that change Mayo's math? Will it corrupt the process? Will it ruin the plan? It's one thing we got to think about, right? These are all questions that we don't know regarding Mayo because he's never done the gig. Never done the gig. Because here's the thing. Once you go to Maye, I don't think you can go back. Once you make that decision is made. You can't go back on that. Because once you make the call, the fans, the ownership, the players in that locker room, you know, we have to look at this and understand the nature of these humans. When you make that call, when you make that decision to go to Drake Maye, you are saying Jacoby Brissett is no longer fit to be the starting quarterback of this team because we believe that Maye is better than him. We believe that Maye is the guy. And once you make that declaration to the football team is going to follow. And you also want to see how Drake Maye deals with adversity. If you throw Maye out there and it doesn't look great early on and you sit him, what does that do to his mentality? What does that do to his confidence level? Once you make that move, you're looking at him and you're telling him, we believe in you, Drake. We believe that you are the guy. And we have all of our support behind you. You can't flip and flop. You just can't. So once you go to, hold on, I got to delete a comment. Can we stop? Can we not do, I'm just catching some of this in the chat. Stay away from race, number one. Let's stay away from politics. Let's stay away from religion. Okay? Let's stay away from that stuff. Okay? We don't need to sit here and venture into some conversations. Let's be responsible about what we do. All right? If you have your own thoughts, have them on your own time. If you're spraying some of that stuff inside the chat, go elsewhere. I got no time for you. Okay? Got no time for you. That's how we roll. Zero patience for ignorance in the chat. So I've got no time for it. No time whatsoever. So let's just keep it as is. Let's look at football. There's no reason to be jumping into some of these other conversations. All right. Once you go to Maye, again, you can't go back because you've made that decision. You have stood by it. You have stood by your guy, and you have made it known that you are going to roll with him the rest of the year. And so you have to see how he deals with the rest. If he doesn't play great, you've got to see, what he does to react to certain things. How does he handle losing games? How does he handle having a rough Sunday? So part of it is the adversity. Once you make that call, you've got to stand by him and say, there's going to be some live bullets flying. So you do what you got to do, right? That's what you do. You do what you have to do, and you stand by him, and you deal with the bad. You deal with the great, you deal with the bad. So you can't go back. Once that move is made, and you're standing by Drake Maye. There are no oopsies to me in this. All right, before we continue thoughts, we've got another super chat here from After the Huddle, $5 super chat. Thank you, After the Huddle, for your contribution to the program. Brissett faced the Bengals twice. Time he was in Cleveland. Could that play a factor into us sneaking out a win? Plus, Burrow is coming off of a wrist injury. I think it's all about the wrist injury more than it is about Brissett playing Cincinnati a couple times, because obviously Cleveland, Cincinnati in the same division. I look at it more as far as the health of Joe Burrow. That means a lot more to what will happen in week one than Brissett's experience against the Bengals, because it's a new team, right? Brissett's playing with the Patriots. It's all about the Patriots versus the Bengals, the offensive line of the Patriots dealing with the Bengals defensive line. You're not carrying over the same team, right? So you can have all the experience in the world against a certain team, but when you're changing teams yourself, then the dynamics are completely different. And we also have the Alex Van Pelt thing, calling plays for the first time, full time. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. But, certainly when you have somebody who has, a comfort level of starting in the NFL, like Jacoby Brissett does, with the experience that he has, then yes, you're more apt to stand by him in week one and roll with him into the season, which is what I would really say is the betting favorite for me. I think Brissett will start the year. But I don't think Brissett facing Cincinnati in prior years has really much to do with the decision that is going to be made. You first have to look at how Drake Maye is doing. If Drake Maye is ready, then Drake Maye starts week one, unless the offensive line is a 5-alarm fire. If the offensive line is okay and Maye outperforms Brissett in the preseason, then Maye should start week 1. I've said that from the beginning. When does he start? He should start when he's ready to start, as long as he's not in danger of getting smoked every snap. So I think that's what you first look at. And then once you get into the season, a lot of things go into that ultimate decision that will be made. How is your team playing? How is Brissett playing? How is the offensive line protecting? You know, the locker room knows real when they see real. So how does the locker room feel about Maye and Brissett? All those things will play a role, but ultimately Jerod Mayo has to make the decision, and he has to make the right decision for the right reasons. And hopefully he will, because if you get that decision wrong, there will be a ripple effect for the next 5 years, and you're going to be spinning back into that quarterback vortex. All right, we've got more on the Patriots and Mayo, but first a word about our sponsor. I've got to give props to Warzone Paintball and Airsoft for sponsoring and supporting this program. They've got 9 maps on 30-plus acres of land. They've got paintball and airsoft. And also, they have those two for every age group starting at 6+. So just show up with jeans and good shoes, a long-sleeve shirt, and Warzone will take care of the rest. They have a fantastic staff, 4.9 star rating online. They're low-key, they're casual. And again, they support a guy like me, so I support them, no doubt. It's not easy to sponsor a local podcast. They jumped right in. They wanted to do that. They've stood by us. I appreciate that from Warzone Paintball and Airsoft. So if you play, paintball or airsoft, or you're interested in doing so with a bunch of friends, swing by North Kingston, Rhode Island. Give them a call at 401-228-6366, 401-228-6366. Tell them the Nick Cattle Show sent you. All right, a very interesting comment by Jacoby Brissett about Mayo caught my eye. Jacoby said this about the head coach. He brings a lot of good energy. The cool thing is you can tell he's trying to make the players on the team run the team. Obviously, he's the head coach, and he sets the standard, but it definitely puts a lot of responsibility on us players. I like it. Jerod Mayo right now absolutely has the vibe that he is being hands-off at the start. Hands off at the start. It seems like that's the way he's going to approach this. Greg Bedard wrote that during the one rookie minicamp that writers got to watch, and the writers will be at OTAs today, so I'm sure we'll get more on that as well. But Bedard wrote that, Mayo was putting the CEO in coach CEO. And he wasn't really getting involved on an in-depth level with anybody on the practice field. He was allowing his coaches and his coordinators to do their job. He was delegating an awful lot. So we have that approach that we've seen so far. And again, it's only an hour, and it was at rookie minicamp, but it certainly seemed like Mayo was going to rely an awful lot on his coaches and coordinators, which makes sense because, as we've said, he's a first-time head coach. He's the first time going through this kind of thing. And you've also heard a lot from the players calling Mayo a player's coach. Jaheim Bell said last week that he thought Mayo was a player during his top 30 visit until he found out that Mayo was actually the coach. And so, look, I don't have an issue with anybody doing their job differently than Bill Belichick. I think there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak, right? You don't have to follow the Belichick playbook. You don't have to be as hands-on. What I wonder is Mayo's approach, does this have to do about when things are happening right now? Is it more of a calendar issue? Is Mayo looking at this and saying to himself, we're going through rookie minicamp, we're going through OTAs, and during these times, during OTAs and rookie minicamps, I'm not going to be as hands-on. I'm going to let my guys build the fundamentals of this team. I want to make sure that my coordinators are creating this foundation of a playbook and relaying what they want to the players. And this time of year specifically is more about building this process and creating that relationship between players and their coaches and their coordinators. So early on, I'm going to take a back seat and I'm going to allow the coaches and coordinators to work with the players on the minutia. That could certainly be what's happening. And it would make logical sense if Mayo was approaching it that way. He might look at it and say the head coach doesn't have to get involved with Alex Van Pelt working with Drake Maye's footwork and mechanics. What the hell am I going to do that is going to help that, right? What does Mayo have that Alex Van Pelt doesn't have to help Drake Maye? That's why you put Van Pelt in charge of that, because he's qualified to do it. So right now, I don't have an issue with Mayo if he is approaching things like this, because he's delegating to his coaches and coordinators, because this is the basic stuff. And he wants to make sure that all of these guys that are on the 90-man have a full understanding of the basics. Let's work on the basics first. Let's let the coaches and coordinators work on that. So is that why Mayo is approaching with a hands-off kind of feel? Or is this how he's going to run the ship? If this is how Mayo is going to run the ship, it is a complete 180 from Bill Belichick. For all the people who thought that Mayo was going to be Belichick light because he played under Belichick for so long and he coached under Belichick, and Belichick was the only head coach that he knew at the NFL level, I think just looking at how this team has been handled so far and how Mayo has approached being the head coach on the practice field, from what we know, he's a complete 180 from Belichick. Now, that could be terrible or it could be great. We have no idea how it's going to work. But there is, when Jacoby Brissett says that Mayo wants players running the team, we have to pay attention to that, because there is a clear difference between players running the team and leading the team. I think if you want the players to lead, that's fine. You don't want the players running the show. And I don't think Mayo wants the players running the show. But that made my ears perk up when I read that from Jacoby Brissett, that Mayo wants the players running the team. And yes, he kind of backtracked a little bit. He said the cool thing is you can tell he's trying to make the players on the team run the team. Then he said, well, obviously he's the head coach and he sets the standard, but he definitely puts a lot of responsibility on us players. And that's fine. Again, I don't have an issue with putting responsibility on the players and asking them to lead each other. That's really the way it should be. But I don't want the players running the operation. The coaches need to run the operation. And I'm sure Mayo understands that. And this is, we also have to understand, this is all of, the feeling out and educational experience for Mayo. This is a learning process. I just saw this as I'm mentioning it. KJ Buys jumps in and says a lot of backtracking from Mayo. I don't feel like there's been a lot of backtracking from Mayo, right? I don't think there's been a lot of backtracking from Jerod Mayo, aside from, the burning cash stuff. We have to understand this. We have to understand that this is Mayo's first shot as a head coach. He's going to make mistakes. We just had a head coach here in New England that coached in the NFL for like 50 years. Belichick coached much longer than Jerod Mayo's been on earth. So there are going to be mistakes made by Mayo. There are. And yes, at times he's going to make mistakes. He's going to say things that he shouldn't say. Right? So these things are going to happen. These mistakes are going to happen. He's going to have a misstep here and there. He is likely going to go back on certain things because he's figuring it out on the go, folks. He has never been a head coach before. No matter what walk of life you're in, if you go into a job that you've never done before, you're going to make mistakes. If you're making sandwiches at Subway for the first time ever, you're going to screw up a sandwich from time to time. If you move from line cook to a chef, you're going to screw up an entree at one point, if not multiple entrees, right? You're a bartender. You're going to screw up drinks for the first time. Like this is what happens. Jerod Mayo is getting on-the-job training. for a lot of these things that he's going to be responsible for. It's not an excuse for Jerod Mayo. It's just to tell you that we should anticipate the guy making mistakes. If you think he's going to be flawless and he's not going to, go back on certain things and say certain things, all right, Griff, you know what? You're gone. You're banned. Had enough of you, bro. See you later. Have a good time in Netherland. I don't ban people, okay? I think I've banned 2 people since I started this podcast, and we're almost at 200 episodes. I do it every single day. I banned people if you bring stupid stuff to the conversation. If you want to make it about you, if you want to make it about race or politics or religion or the owners being Jewish, like Griff was trying to do, I've got no room for that nonsense. This podcast has no room for that podcast. So it's not me taking free speech away from you or not allowing you to criticize certain things. When you want to come in here on a sports podcast and spew stuff about somebody's religion or somebody's ancestry or somebody's race or somebody's politics, that's not the conversation that we have here. Go to other spots, go outside of this channel, go to social media and enjoy that cesspool, because that's not what we do here. We can go back and forth about sports. If you want to sit here and go back and forth about sports and have a debate about Jerod Mayo as a head coach based off of his lack of experience, we can have that conversation. If you want to sit there and talk to me about Jerod Mayo and throw shade at Mayo because he's black or whatever fakakta thing you want to throw out there, I ain't got time for that. I ain't got time for it. You want to be a keyboard hero, be a keyboard hero elsewhere. We're not having it. And I'll block every single person that comes in here with that crap. And I probably would have blocked him a long time ago if I was able to keep up with the vitriol. So what are we doing? Enough with it. We're not going to take straight up ignorance here. We're not going to do it. I'm not hosting a politics channel. I'm not hosting a race channel and debating race in America. It's absurd. So he gone. And the next person that decides to throw this stuff in here on the YouTube channel, they'll be gone too. That's what we do. Not about criticism. So you got your 2 seconds of fame, Griff. Hopefully you find another chat that you can get involved in and you can spew that stuff and people can get all riled up. I've wasted enough time on you. Have a good life. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. All right, back on Jerod Mayo and Jacoby Brissett, what he said. It's a feeling. It's a feeling out process. It's an educational experience for Mayo. He's going to make mistakes. And I would like to highlight something. Everybody talks about Dan Campbell. Everybody talks about Campbell and what a great job he's done with Detroit. Do you remember how Dan Campbell started in Detroit? It was awful. Awful. And I was wrong about Campbell. I was criticizing him with how he dealt with the media and that he was too emotional. I watched Hard Knocks last year and said, this guy's never going to get it. He's crying at practice. He's too emotional. He's like, does he have it in him to be the guy? Dan Campbell started 0-10-1 with the Lions. 0-10-1. That included a 16-16 tie against the Steelers in Week 9. Campbell and the Lions recorded their first victory of the season in Week 13. So Campbell and Detroit, they did not get their first win of his first season. And he had been, an interim head coach before. But his first season with Detroit as the head guy, it took until Week 13 to get their first win. They beat the Vikings, who, by the way, Jared Goff threw a game-winning touchdown as time expired. So they were literally seconds away from beginning the year 0-11-1 with Campbell. Then they won 3 of their final 6. So in Dan Campbell's first year with the Lions, they were 3-13-1. You might say, oh, well, yeah, but in 2022, they were much better, Nick. True. Yes. They finished with a 9-8 record in 2022. However, Do you remember how they started 2022? The Lions started 2022 1-6. So in Dan Campbell's, let me try to do the math here quickly. So 3-13-1. You got 17 games there and then another 7 games. So the Lions only won 4 of Dan Campbell's first 24 games that he coached. Think about that. Dan Campbell won 4 of the first 24 games he coached with the Lions. Now everybody looks at him and goes, oh, man, he's got to figure it out. You know, after that start, in late 2022, the Lions started to really put the foot on the gas. They had a mid-season turnaround. The Lions ended up winning 8 of their next 10 games. So Dan Campbell, in the first 24 games of his tenure as Lions head coach, had 4 wins. Then in the midway point of 2022, they win 8 of their next 10 games, 8 of their final 10 games, and they finished 2022 with a 9-8 record. And last year, you've got blast off. So we always, the one thing I say is this. I did national radio for a number of years. And so I've looked at, different things, and I understand that when you're doing local radio, because I've done a ton of local radio too, and I've been guilty of this, you tend to get wrapped up in your own bubble, right? And fans are guilty of this as well, because fans have to live their life. They've got children, they've got wives, they've got partners, they've got houses and homes and mortgages and rents, and there's a lot of crap going on a daily basis. Health, taking care of older people, all of those things, right? And so fans, they don't have a lot of time. Most fans, they don't have a lot of time to invest in looking at not only their own product that they watch, but everybody else. And I take it as my responsibility to fill in some of those holes, because this is what I do. This is my life. My wife loves it. Trust me. So I understand that people are not going to remember, and they shouldn't remember what Dan Campbell did in 2021 as the head coach of the Lions. And they're not going to remember what Dan Campbell's first, 24 games record-wise was as head coach of the Lions. So that's why I think it's crucial to add context to these conversations, context that is sorely missing in a lot of these discussions that happen in New England. So, when we look at this, reasonable expectations for Jerod Mayo. If Mayo goes out there and they win 6 games this year, it doesn't mean he's going to suck as a head coach. It might mean he's going to suck as a head coach. We don't know what he's going to be. But now everybody is singing the praises of Dan Campbell because of what this team, and what his team rather, has done since the midway point of 2022. But before that, it was a disaster. It was a circus. So we try to keep things in perspective. We need to be patient in 2024. You've got a lot of offensive turnover. You're going to have a tough schedule. You have a rookie head coach. You've got Alex Van Pelt calling plays full-time for the first time since 2009, when he was thrown into that job right before the season kicked off with the Bills. You have a first-time defensive coordinator calling plays at the NFL level. It's going to take some time. Not an excuse to be an embarrassment. I don't think this team will get blown out every week. It's just to keep the big picture in mind. We'll break down week to week. We'll break down the good, the bad, the terrible, the awesome. We'll do it here. Those that have followed this podcast know that. When they deserve criticism, they will be criticized. When they deserve love, they will be given love. We will throw them their flowers when they deserve it. But it's just to remember that you got a rookie head coach. He's going to screw up. If Mayo doesn't screw up this year, then they made an excellent hire. Let's put it that way, right? So I think it's reasonable for Mayo to screw up this year. At times. It's not to excuse if he's an abject failure and getting simple things wrong in week 6 or 7. We will criticize that. But it's generally with the idea of Let's have reasonable expectations for him. If he goes back on something because he said something he didn't want to say, that happens. If it's happening in year 3, 4, 5, then you got a problem. If he doesn't learn from the mistakes, then you have a problem. If this team doesn't show improvement throughout the year, then you have somewhat of a problem. This team should be better in the last month than it was the first month. And wins and losses are not an indication as to how the team is playing, by the way. Might sound weird, but this team could be terrible through the first month and a half, 2 months, and they could get better as the season goes on and still not win a lot of games, because even though they are playing better and are better, doesn't necessarily mean they are better than the teams that they are playing. Does that make sense? I hope it does. You have to look at this team individually and see who's improving. Is Jalen Polk a much better football player in week 14 than he was in week 1? Is Drake Maye starting for this team? And when he does start, whenever that decision is made by Mayo, what does he look like week 6 to what he looks like in week 17? That's what this is about. And I understand this is going to be a process. A lot of you, or at least some of you, are not used to this, right? I get it. I totally get it. I'm sure many of you spent the brunt of your life watching the Patriots win every single year, make it to the AFC championship game almost every single year, win Super Bowls, relatively speaking, all the freaking time compared to other teams. I understand. But this is what happens. I've covered teams. I've talked about teams that were starting from scratch. I covered the Commanders back in 2012 when they drafted RG3. I was there for the beginning. I was there through the RG3 year. I was there through Kirk Cousins. I was there through the injuries. I was there watching that team. From Jay Gruden to Ron Rivera. I watched it play out. I covered that team. I covered the Patriots here when they were winning constantly. I covered the 49ers out in Sacramento, a team that is perennially, that's a tough word. I'm not even going to try that again. Consistently winning. It's a Monday. Consistently winning. So I understand. We have to look at the big picture, though. And as long as these young guys are improving, that's what you want to take mostly out of this season. As long as Jerod Mayo and this coaching staff is improving, that's the number one priority. Winning 9 games this year is not the priority. Seeing this team improve. And again, doesn't mean W's versus L's, because you could be a much better team in week 16 than you were in week 6, but you lose to the Buffalo Bills because the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen just happen to be better than you. So that's what we have to keep in mind. And that's what we're doing here. If you want to support the show, one of the best things you can do is share it on your social media. Tag me at Nick C Radio. That helps us get the word out. And I appreciate every single one of you that do. Okay? So again, support the show. If you see us throw stuff out there, at Nick C Radio that way. At Nick C Radio on X. I throw clips out there of the show. If you see it, repost it. Comment about it. As long as it's a good comment. Like it. Do those kinds of things. That helps us move along here. So does liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing. And throw some comments in, as long as they're not ridiculous comments that I addressed earlier. Throw those comments in there. If they are ridiculous, guess what? I'm going to delete them. If your comment has anything to do outside of the sports topics that we talk about here, you're going to get your comment deleted. That's the way it works. Sorry, not sorry. All right. Before we bid you adieu, I wanted to talk about the Bees for a minute and Linus Ullmark. Bruins obviously lost on Friday night. It was a fun bridge year. I did not anticipate the Bruins beating the Panthers in this series. Pushing it to a game 6, to me, was a good result, honestly, where this team began. We forget, you lost Krejci, you lost Bergeron. You were signing guys like Danton Heinen in October, Van Riemsdyk, Shattenkirk. All of these kinds of contracts told you this was a bridge year. They did not have the money to invest. They had to get their books straightened out, and they were going to rely on their defensive pairings and their goaltending. That's how they were going to win. If you told me this team would have 109 points and get to game 6 of the second round against the Panthers, I would tell you that was a successful season given the expectation level. given the talent on this team or lack thereof. I mean, frankly, Morgan Geekie is not a top 2 line center. He's just not. And you're relying on him against the Panthers. So I think they got as much out of this team as they could. Defensive inconsistencies bit them. Penalties bit them. But Jeremy Swayman was the reason why this team got to Game 6 in the second round. Swayman was freaking tremendous, which begs the question about Linus Ullmark's future. Ty Anderson spoke to Ullmark with the rest of the media yesterday, asked him about his future. He said, "My future here smiling. I got one more year." Anderson posted, "I asked Ullmark about his no trade and if he would exercise the right this summer. He said the teams that are on his list are on there for a reason, and he doesn't want to disclose reasons why. Says it's between himself, his family, and agent." Fluto Shinzawa posted that Ullmark wants to return, said he feels like he'll be on a revenge tour, quote unquote. Ty Anderson posted that Swayman says the goal for him is a long-term deal with the Bruins, confident it gets done, doesn't want to be anywhere else. I think the Bruins absolutely wrap up Jeremy Swayman on a long-term contract extension. I would be shocked. I would be shocked if that didn't happen. I said this. They should have given Swayman his contract extension on the plane back to Boston after Game 5. So what's going on with Ullmark? Well, Fluto Shinzawa at The Athletic wrote about Ullmark, said Ullmark expressed reservations about being moved before the trade deadline, primarily because an in-season deal might have required him to uproot his family. That's according to a source close to Ullmark. Ullmark and his wife have 2 school-aged children. Destination was not necessarily Ullmark's concern. Whether Ullmark would feel the same way about an offseason trade is unknown. Ullmark and Don Sweeney have declined to answer whether the goalie exercised his partial trade protection, but according to Cap Friendly, 16 teams are on Ullmark's no-trade list. Now, for a team chasing a net upgrade, Shinzawa writes, trading for Ullmark would have a bigger impact than signing any of the UFA guys that are available. Trading Ullmark and his $5 million average annual would help offset the raise Swayman is going to get. Playoff teams seeking goaltending upgrades include the Avalanche, Oilers, Kings, and Maple Leafs. Of course, the Bruins, they're not going to help the Maple Leaf. Non-playoff teams that are looking for goaltending help, Blue Jackets, Red Wings, Devils, Senators, Flyers, and Sharks. You could also throw Carolina into the mix. I think Carolina is a team that would be interested in Ullmark. Shinzawa writes, moving Ullmark before the draft is a priority. The return could be more than just picks. The goalie market will be bigger in June than it was in March, when accommodating Ullmark's cap hit would have limited the list of interested parties. Look, priority number 1 for this hockey team this offseason is to trade Linus Ullmark. You don't need Ullmark and Swayman, especially when you have the holes that this team has. It's an embarrassment of riches already to have the Vezina Trophy winner to go along with Swayman and what he did this year and what he just did in this postseason. To have 2 number 1 goalies when you need top 6 help and when I think you need some defense help, especially on the left side, left shot, you just don't do it. You're not going to spend $13 to $15 million per year on the goaltending when you've got scoring issues and some defenseman issues. Grzelcyk's gone. Jake DeBrusk could easily be gone. So when you look at this, you're just not going to pay what it would take to keep Ullmark and Swayman in town. It makes zero sense. So the number 1 priority for this team right now, for this club, is to deal Linus Ullmark. The draft is about 6 weeks away. So Sweeney, Cam Neely, they have to get those phones cooking right now. And I'm sure they're already talking to teams. And the teams that they spoke with at the trade deadline, I'm sure they're revisiting those conversations. Swayman is a number 1 goalie. There are no questions about it. He was really good during the season. He was excellent in the postseason. He took the brunt of the games, right? He only sat for 1 game in that Toronto series. He showed that he can play every other night and play at a high level. So if you were worried about his gas tank, he proved those worries to not be much of a concern at all. His gas tank is there. He's a quality goaltender. He's young. You have Brendan Bussey down in Providence, who's only 25 years old. Bussey had a .913 save percentage in 41 games for the P Bruins this year. So Bussy is absolutely ready to come up and be that second guy. You've got Swayman, you've got Bussy. Move on. Trade Ullmark, get some picks. If you can get a player, great. Of course, this team, they traded all their picks last year for that run, right? They brought in Bertuzzi, they brought in Orlov, they brought in all those guys, and they traded all those picks. Lindholm, they moved their first, second, third, and seventh round picks last year to try to make that run. So you replenish some of that draft capital by trading Ullmark, and hopefully you also get a player that can help you. And you've got Bussy to slide right in and be the number 2 guy. You're going to take from an overwhelming strength. Take from the overwhelming strength and address other needs with the assets that you get and the money that you create by dealing Ullmark. You need top 6 help. Again, you can't have Geeky as part of, your top 2 lines when you get to the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's just, and I give Geeky all the credit in the world. The dude played really well. He played much better than most of us anticipated. He exceeded expectations, as did Heinen. But when you look at it moving forward, you cannot depend on Geeky to be that guy. You just can't. So you need some work on the top 6. You need center figured out, at least one center. You need at least one wing, if not 2 wingers. DeBrusk is a UFA, probably not coming back. Left shot defenseman. Grzelcyk is out. Lindholm wasn't very good. And yes, I would entertain dealing Hampus Lindholm in a second, depending on what's offered. But yes, I would be looking to deal Hampus Lindholm. He has not been the same guy since the playoffs last year. So you get a lot to figure out. The good news is the Bruins have $21 million in projected cap space. They've got Ullmark, who I think is valuable on the market. So they've got things they can do, and they've got money they can spend. All right. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up. Like the podcast. Means an awful lot to us. Let's beat that YouTube algorithm. Give us that like. Subscribe as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Trying to get to 3,500 subscriptions. We're slowly getting there. Rate and review on Spotify and Apple Pods. I also want to mention that I have a new podcast debuting on the Patreon page this Friday. It's called Off the Cuff. I'm going to do some national sports headline stuff. I'm going to do some lifestyle stuff. We're going to have some fun. Off the Cuff on Friday's Patreon page. So if you like what I do here, but you want to see a little bit of a different side of me, a little bit more, you can check it out on the Patreon page. $5 a month, $1.25 a week. We also have community chats that we do. We also have a weekly Boston sports podcast that we do exclusively to the Patreon people on Wednesday nights. So check it out, patreon.com/Nick Cattle, CATTLES, $5 a month. If you like Bruins talk, Celtics talk, Red Sox talk, we do a little bit more of that over at the Patreon. All right, that'll do it. Appreciate your time as always on this Monday. Be well for the rest of the day. We're back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Until then, this is the Nick Cattle Show.